Do you ever wonder what's going on in your favorite content creators' minds? Well, specifically today, I'm thinking about Sony cameras. You see, I'm always really interested in different pieces of photography, videography, and live streaming gear. I'm very interested in this crazy wide 14mm lens I picked up on B&H on a super cheap sale that I'm filming with right now. But I kept my same standard recommendations for hardware that streamers should use for their cameras and microphones for quite a long time. I had no real reason to change it. The Panasonic G7 was one of the best offerings that you could get for the price, be that $500 new or $300 to $400 used, depending on whether you wanted the lens or you got a third-party lens, which I usually recommended. It was a phenomenal value, especially if you were seeking 4K. But if you were looking to do live streaming, looking to do 1080p 60, or if you're wanting to do more autofocus stuff, you know, vlogs, things like that, it wasn't the best recommendation. And since that wasn't really my focus, I never really found a good cross between the two. Well, ever since picking up multiple Sony cameras, I really don't think there's a reason to recommend any other company other than Sony when it comes to these smaller form factor cameras. It's pretty bonkers. What's also bonkers is the fact that I haven't talked about our sponsor for this video. So I've made a couple videos in the past, not as many as I have on the Panasonic G7, but recommending this camera, the Sony A5100. This is a super small and now super affordable camera that can be used for live streaming. It is an APS-C sensor camera, so it has a bigger sensor than the Panasonic G7, which is micro four thirds, which means you get a wider field of view, which is super helpful because things get really cramped on the Panasonic G7 unless you're using just the widest angle lens you have, which meant that most of my shooting on the G7 was always done with that 12mm lens. Super wide, not a whole lot of flexibility because you slap anything with a longer focal length on it and you get some serious crop issues. I have a whole video explaining crop sensor difficulties with content creation, linked in the description below. By the way, my desk is a completely disaster at the moment because I just finished my Elgato 4K 60S Plus review and it's rendering behind me. All the stuff is still laid out from doing this, but I needed to talk about these cameras. This camera is phenomenal. Like I said, APS-C size sensor, you can power it over a dummy battery that runs to a USB port instead of needing wall power, which is always great, super lightweight. You can't power it off of its actual USB power, but the dummy batteries for it run to USB power, which is pretty cool. APS-C size sensor, which like I said, lets in more light, wider field of view, more depth of field for that blurred out background. There are fairly cheap lenses for it if you just get the kit lenses for getting autofocus and things like that. It has a flip up screen. Unfortunately, it's not a flip to the side screen, so there's no mic mount on the top. That is rather unfortunate, but it does have a flip up screen, does 1080p 60, really high quality. The autofocus is pretty fast. It's very impressive. That was the big issue with the Panasonic G7 was it had no autofocus. This has great autofocus, great 1080p 60 performance. It's a great stream camera. I use it for multiple stream cameras throughout my setup, including at my workbench for my PC building streams, for my retro stream setup, things like that. These are great little cameras. I'm actually setting this one up for an Instagram live streaming setup with this lens soon. I'll have maybe a separate video on that. Get subscribed. The best part about the Sony A5100 is it can be picked up dirt cheap. You cannot beat the value of this camera for a live streaming camera, period. I got this one for 150 bucks on OfferUp. I see them on OfferUp and Let Go all the time for 150 bucks, 200 bucks, 250 bucks, 300 bucks. They are super cheap and you can even get them used cheap. Amazon's prices of them kind of fluctuated quite a bit and they kind of spiked for a little bit after CES, which was rather unfortunate. And there's a lot of price gouging going on right now with the current crisis economically. But on the used market, these things are dirt cheap and it's pretty hard to break them. The only concern is that the micro HDMI jack is a little, you know, flimsy, but you can get some tape to, or super glue your cable in if you never plan on unplugging it. But for the most part, it's hard to break these things. So if you want a really, really cheap option, that's the one to go with. If you want a more expensive option, I have a couple other cameras to look at. My next favorite camera is this one. This is the Sony A6400. I've actually been using this as my main A camera for a long time because I was so impressed with the colors that I could get out of it, which is kind of strange because I'm shooting on a cinema camera. But I bought this camera to shoot my stream critique series, wherein I wanted a very quick setup. Settings just look great out of the box. It has really fast autofocus that you can train it on your face because a lot of autofocus likes to catch my chair mesh back here. You can train it on your face so that it's never missing focus. Again, APS-C size sensor, beautiful 4K image, 100 megabit per second codec, flip up screen, microphone input. This was my one-stop shop for shooting a lot of my A-cam videos. And the image out of it looks beautiful and phenomenal. There is a lot of contention over Canon colors for videos and photos because so many people actually prefer Canon's color schemes and the way they render skin tones and stuff. I've always hated it. I've always been very confused by that discussion because my skin never looks right on Canon colors. As you can tell, I'm quite the pale boy. I got some rosiness in me. I got some, purple blotches, especially since it's 4 a.m. when I'm recording this. Anyway, yikes. But I've never looked great on Canon cameras. Sony colors, which nobody talks about, render my skin phenomenally. I've been blown away by how my skin looks out of this camera, so much so that I've now finally been taking the time to figure out color grading to actually color grade my Ursa Mini Pro here, my cinema camera I shoot on, in order to match this, because I like how I look out of this better than I usually get out of this, which is pretty phenomenal. So this is a great camera if you want a more expensive camera. I paid like $800 for this new, and then got the Sigma 16mm f1.4 lens on there. It's a little bit more expensive, but if you're looking for the more artsy camera, if you're looking for something for that really crisp 4K video, this is the one to go with. Now, when it comes to this A6400, you may notice that there's some extra metal on this. This is called a camera cage. Now, typically this serves a couple different functions. One, it protects the camera. If you drop it, you have this big metal frame that's gonna take a lot of the damage. You may bend it, but you'll keep your body a little bit more safe. And two, it lets you mount and adapt a lot more stuff to it. It has all these like cheese grater holes to it. These are all basically taps to screw in extra accessories. So I have screwed in a small rig mic clamp because while it has one on the top here, and that's nice, any microphone that I really plug in here is going to bump up against and block the flip up screen, which unfortunately, again, is not a side flip screen. And so putting a big microphone with a cable sticking out the back is going to bump into this screen. So I have a side mount for a microphone so that I can, whenever I have it on a tripod or something like that, I can put it here. If I'm running handheld and need the microphone, then I move it over to this side. Now, this cage is from a company called Fengsheng. It is the S64 model. It's actually the second A6400 cage that I have. I actually have the small rig cage for this camera as well. And this one got sent out as well as a lens I'm gonna talk about from Fengsheng, from a seller on Amazon. I'll have their link in the description below, go check it out. And honestly, I wasn't sure I would like this over the small rig. The small rig has a nice wooden handle on it. Seems like it has more to grip. But as I put this on, I realized I didn't really miss the extra handle at all. Like, yes, there's less to grab onto, but my hand personally can still reach here. And this cage actually blocks significantly less of the functionality of the camera than the small rig cage does. The giant handle actually makes it really difficult to reach the little button in there that you press to take off a lens. So anytime I swap lenses, it was really obnoxious. It blocked the power switch quite a bit, which was really obnoxious. And then the metal around the bottom was a lot more dense. And so since I usually have this mounted on my little rolly camera rig here, flipping this open to get the memory card out back and forth and the battery out was actually rather obnoxious on that cage. And all of that is a lot easier to manage on this Fengsheng cage. Obviously, installation is super easy. You just put it around your camera, screw it into the bottom tripod screw of your camera, and then I attach a quick release plate because I use the Arca Swiss system for all of my tripod mounts and things like that. If you're not invested in Arca Swiss and you're using these smaller cameras, it will save you a ton of time and energy when it comes to mounting and unmounting your cameras. The last thing you want to do is sit there and turn it and spin it on a tripod every time you're moving your camera. Easy to set up. You can attach any normal accessories to it. Pretty freaking awesome. The same seller actually ended up sending out something different that I didn't expect, and it is my second good Sony lens. I've got the Sigma 16mm f1.4. I actually reviewed this on Micro Four Thirds back around Christmas of 2018, I want to say. Well, now I have the Viltrox 85mm f1.8. This lens is phenomenal. This is a beautiful lens. Look at that absolutely massive and gorgeous front element there. This is a wonderful lens. 85mm is one of those focal lengths. There's a lot of filmmaking YouTube channels that have made videos about it. 85mm is one of those focal lengths where you need quite a bit of distance between yourself, your camera, and your subject, especially on crop sensor cameras. But the image you get out of it just looks so cinematic because the background is so compressed and you've got so much depth of field to work with, especially at f1.8. This one is really beautiful. It's nice and big, and it is full frame, so it does work on my Sony A7S II. I've primarily used it on this A6400. I use it for quite a bit of B-roll shots whenever I want a sort of macro look. It's not really a macro lens. The minimum focusing distance isn't super close, especially on the full frame. For whatever reason, it's worse on the full frame than the A6400, but whatever. But the shots that I do get out of it, of the close-up subjects and things like that, look absolutely beautiful. Now, my A6400 is not my main photo camera. I have a 6D Mark II for that, but I do take this out sometimes if I just want to grab it quickly because it's always here for taking pictures. And the pictures that I get with this A6400, especially now that with this Viltrox 85mm, especially now that it is springtime and there's lots of little flowers and things like that to take pictures of, the pictures are just, amazing. So this is actually my favorite Sony lens. This one is pretty close, but it's not specific to Sony necessarily. And you know, I don't know, 16mm is pretty boring. It's like the basic, like here I'm on camera field of view. It's nothing too phenomenal. It's not super interesting. This one has some interesting aspects to it. It looks phenomenal and is one of my favorite lenses. It's also really, really sharp, which I wasn't expecting. I haven't used many Viltrox lenses, but wasn't expecting that. Really freaking sharp. I will have links to both this and the camera cage, as well as all the camera gear that I've talked about in this video in the description below. I highly recommend you go check them out. Lastly, of course, I have my webcam back there, which is the Sony A7S II. That's also my travel and event camera because I took it to CES as well, and it is a full frame camera that does 4K 30 as well. It has image stabilization. It has the most phenomenal low light performance you're gonna get out of any camera for video. And again, it's full frame, which means, especially when traveling for events like CES where I'm in cramped corridors, you never feel cramped with the camera. You always have wide field of view, and the image quality out of it is so great and the low light performance is so great that I was able to take and use, and that's even what I'm using as my webcam right now, a kit lens that came with the original A7, which is a 28-70 f3.5 to 5.6, a lens that if you put it on a T3i or a Panasonic G7 or even the A5100, I'd be like, no, you should upgrade from that lens. The low light performance and stuff out of the A7S II make that a wonderful lens to use. I used it for all of my CES coverage. It was beautiful. I use it as my webcam right now. It is beautiful. It's a great deal. You can get them used for about $800, which beats out some of the other webcam alternative markets or options. And so that's what I run as my primary webcam alternative. This is what I run as my basically B cam for my A cam, you know, my secondary run and gun auto, you know, shooting. My only complaint about the A6400 is the lack of stabilization, because I have the, you can't see it back there, but I have the switch pod, little tripod and things like that, and you get quite a bit of shaky cam in this. That is rather unfortunate. And then if you're looking for the cheapest and best value Sony cam, you've got the A5100 right here. I just wanted to talk cameras, talk shop with you because it's been a little while. I haven't checked in. I love covering cameras and things like that. And I wanted to talk about some of the stuff I got for it. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you've had any experience with Sony cameras or switching from another brand to Sony and what you think about it in the comment section down below. It's been a really weird switch for me because other than the lenses currently mounted to cameras and that Viltrox lens I got sent, I don't have Sony glass. In fact, my A5100 here has a EF to E mount adapter for my Canon glass because I'm all Canon and a little bit of Micro Four Thirds and a lot of vintage lenses that you can adapt to the different formats. And so jumping into Sony was just really an awkward decision for me, but I am loving the bodies so far, so that may influence my decisions moving forward. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe for more streaming education and content creation topics to discuss with us on our Discord server, EposVox.com/Discord, and I'll see you in the next one. If you want to see some more crazy shots with all of my fun lenses and things like that, go follow me on Instagram, Instagram.com/EposVox. I'll see you later.